Hey everyone, welcome to week 15, day 1. So for the past 2 weeks, we've been using acrylic gouache and with a pretty, kind of extended palette. For this week, we thought it was going to be cool if we go back to oil paints, and we're going to try something a little bit different with Danny. We're going to put like a small palette right next to the painting so that you guys can see how we're mixing our paint. But we're also gonna reduce our palette, quite dramatically. So we're gonna use a sort of Zorn palette, but instead of having the accent in the cad red with the saturation of the cad red, we're gonna exchange the cad red for a red ochre, for an earth red. The one I'm gonna use is Terra Rosa, but you guys can use whatever you want. So super limited palette, a ton of control, a ton of harmony. We're gonna try to make very specific paintings throughout the week, and hopefully it'll show the broad range of possibilities that you have with a very tiny palette. Okay, let's get started. So for this week, I wanted to make a transition back to oil paint. Like I said, there's very specific reasons for doing that. The easiest one to understand is that even though I've loved doing the past few weeks with acrylic gouache, I'm running out of it. I use the Holbein one, and I bought it recently on a trip that I had to. I think I bought it in San Francisco at a Blick store. I had tried it once on my moleskin paper, and I've had horrible results. So I was very hesitant about using it to do paintings for the channel, but I've had incredible experiences with it in the past couple of weeks, and my brain was getting just used to it. And I was telling myself, oh my God, if I don't go back to oil painting now, I probably won't touch oil paint again because everything just seemed a little bit easier. The fact that I could clean my brushes super quickly, there's no mess, you could clean your palette really easily. The ease of use is definitely something that I've been wanting to transition to. So I told myself, dude, if you don't go back right now to oil paint, you probably will never look at oil paint again. And that's what I wanted to do. But with Danny, we've been considering how to put the palette. And for now, for dumb technical reasons, we can't really do a picture-in-picture, kind of like a double camera, where we just do a small window for the palette in the bottom. That's what we tried to do once, to have like a camera on the bottom part of the screen so you could always see the palette. But we were recording at different FPS, and that was a mess. When we tried to import it, it didn't sync well. I don't know. It was just a little too annoying. And we were like, oh my God, this is going to be so much work to try to sync it up that let's just not do it. But, we found a very practical way of doing it, which is just putting a small palette to the side. I think in this first one, I'm just putting some paraffin paper on the side, and I'm going to paint on top of that. That's totally fine. That can serve perfectly as a palette. It's non-absorbent, so you're totally fine by using that paper. That, by the way, is a very good alternative if you hate cleaning your palette. But I wanted also to make a transition to oil paint, but I've been so enamored by chroma in the past couple of weeks that I thought I was veering off from the painting that is closest to my sensibility, which is tonal painting, which is painting that is kind of based on value and the control of value and the decisions that I make regarding value, and how by lowering my saturation, usually by making grayer paintings, more muted paintings, I can actually emphasize those tonal decisions. So for me, the extra weight that means to use colors that have higher saturation is something that I've always been willing to part with. My paintings usually don't rely upon decisions that I make based on saturation, on chroma. They don't even depend on the fact that there's a multitude of hues in the painting. So honestly, these are all extremely gratifying exercises when I just step away from my comfort zone and I try to understand color in ways that don't come naturally to me. But I always love to go back to like the motherland. I always go back to the place where I feel the most comfortable. And I do it not just to feel comfort, not just to feel safe, but I do it because I really feel that I need to kind of ground myself and understand color from the bottom up. So if I am using chroma, I really feel that and this is almost counterintuitive, but I almost feel that my understanding of how to respect and use chroma effectively will not come just from using super highly saturated colors, but will come from understanding a limited palette more thoroughly. I know this is weird because if I want to get rid of the fright that I feel whenever I see a highly saturated yellow or a highly saturated orange or a highly saturated green, you would suppose that what you have to do is almost like, you don't know how to swim, I'll push you in the lake. No, I feel that you don't need to bang yourself against the wall continually until you get it. You go back to basics and you just solidify those basics. And when those are strong, then you just won't be scared if a color has saturation. You'll be like, oh yeah, that has saturation, I'll deal with it. Like, I'll know how to deal with it. And this is something that I actually believe in that doesn't necessarily apply to only saturation or color theory. A lot of times I hear people say, oh, could you give me tips on how to paint a head, how to do portraits? I have no clue. I always tell people, just draw anything, paint anything. You could paint chairs for 10 years, and if you are amazing at painting chairs, you will be able to paint a portrait. And the reason you'll be able to do it is because your sensitivity is going to be growing and developing, and the way you observe is going to be growing and developing with time, and the way you understand how to translate whatever you're seeing, whatever you're observing into paint, you're going to be honing that ability. So who cares what your subject matter is? You're going to be able to paint whatever is put in front of you or whatever you choose to be in front of you, regardless of what the actual subject matter is. So I kind of feel the same with color. It will take a minute for me to adjust. And by a minute, I don't mean literally a minute. I mean I have to do 10 paintings to start to feel comfortable. Because come on, painting is not easy. It's not like you turn a switch and you say, okay, yeah, I get it, fine. Yeah, I can use these colors and I'm good. I don't need any help. No, come on. Like, for anyone that's out there that has painted, you all know that this is not true. We have to have a place where we can adjust, where we can reflect upon what we did and then say, what are the changes that I'm supposed to do? And by place, sometimes I mean, yeah, it takes 10 paintings. It takes 15 paintings. And to me, that's like nothing. If that's the effort that you have to do so that you start to get comfortable with something, then so be it. That's totally fine. It's the same thing like when I used to teach life drawing class. Nobody, I don't care how good you are. I mean, well, yeah, some people are amazing, but usually for everyone else, for everyone that's normal, we need like maybe 20 minutes, half an hour to warm up. And first drawings that you're going to do as soon as you get to a drawing class, those drawings are not going to be great. Usually you're kind of feeling out your page, your proportion, especially if you're not bound to like a specific proportion. Like, let's say you work constantly on like vertical 18 by 24 pads, and you already know how large the head has to be. And suddenly somebody says, oh, could you flip your board and put it horizontal? So now you have to fit those figures in, and your hand has been so used to doing a head that is going to fit on the vertical of your page that as soon as you change the variables, it's like, oh, you go insane. You're like, oh, adjust, I have to adjust. It's exactly the same thing. And this week, we thought it would be great if that adjustment period, that small kind of adjustment period where you can kind of ease yourself back into oil paint, would be through a palette that is essentially a 4-color palette. Now remember, we usually refer to this palette as a Zorn palette, and that's almost shorthand. But what we are trying to communicate by saying that is that it's a very limited palette where you're going to try to think of this palette as if it were a primary color palette, but you're usually substituting your blue for black. So that's the one thing we usually change. And we usually use ivory black, right? But that palette always tends to have an accent that comes in the form of saturation. So you're always going to pick one of those colors, specifically the red hue, and you're going to say, okay, I want some punch in here, so I'm going to put a cad red in there. So usually a 4-color palette would be titanium white, yellow ochre, cad red or vermilion, and ivory black. But what we're going to do today is actually eliminate that accent. So we're not going to have a crazy saturated high point in our palette. Everything is going to be grounded. And by grounded, I mean that before we had very cool colors at the end of the spectrum, which are ivory black and titanium white. We had an earth yellow, which is kind of neutral. And then we had a super saturated, warm red-orange. Now we're going to have, yes, our 2 cool colors at the end, titanium white, ivory black. We're going to keep our earth yellow, and we're going to have an earth red also. So again, it's not going to be as bright of a color, so it's not as light as cad red, and it's obviously not going to be as saturated. By earth red, I mean a variety of options that you can pick from. I'm using Terra Rosa, which I really, really like, but there's tons of earth reds. We've already mentioned them before, but you could pick Indian red, Mars red, Venetian red, anything that falls into the category of like a red ochre, a red earth, you're going to be totally fine. There are variations in temperature and a little bit in hue. Some are towards the more cooler red and some are towards the orange red side. That's totally fine. Pick whichever you want. The difference won't be like immense, so don't worry about it. And the reason that I'm trying to ground this palette, again, is to just gain a ton of control over oil paint. Because my brain was getting so used to seeing like bright greens, bright purples, bright blues, there was a ton of brightness, lightness, and saturation with the gouache palette and with the neon colors, the fluorescent colors that I was using prior to that, that they were making my brain have to adjust really badly whenever I saw my regular palette. Remember that I spoke about how having those neon orange and red underneath my cad red just made my red look so dirty and so muddy that my brain started perceiving it very, very differently. And I didn't like that. I didn't like that because I love to have appreciation for colors that don't need to be so loud. That's just me. But for now, I just don't want to feel that my palette is kind of old and dirty and muddy and that I just don't want to go back to it. I don't because there's a part of my body that is telling me that I have to go back. And it's very, very gratifying when I just put the paintings that I have done on the previous week aside and I kind of tell my brain to start from zero. And the way I thought it would be nice to do that this week was to say, okay, let's go back to a very, very controlled palette. It's going to give me super controlled results, but the burden is going to be then to try and push the palette so that I can speak about blue grays and green grays and violet grays and pinks and yellows and oranges. I do feel that I'm not restrained in the sense that I have access to a ton of hues, a wide variety of hues, but that I can have also the certainty that I'm not going to go crazy with them because the palette is actually telling me, you can't go nuts with this palette because there's nowhere to go. Everything is going to be so close to each other. All the mixes, all the earth hues are going to be so close to each other that don't just think of that as limiting. Think of that as like, oh, you're not going to get lost. That's everything that I hear whenever I see my palette, the one that I'm using today. My brain just tells me, dude, don't worry. Don't be scared. There's no way anything hazardous is going to happen. You're not going to be able to mix something that's totally dissonant. There's not going to be an area of the painting where you just put something down and go like, whoa, that's, that wasn't the color that I was trying to paint. Everything is very welcoming about this palette. But since I had come from a very playful mindset by using some of the neon colors and then the acrylic gouache, I thought, well, you know what? Let's just give ourselves the opportunity to, yes, have a more grounded, more controlled palette, more muted, but let's have fun with form. Let's distort and push shapes. And again, I've said this before, but I always think that if we do paintings of each other, and by each other I mean, You know, if painters are painting other painters, we always feel awesome. I've told this before, but when other people have painted me, I always tell them, oh, dude, go nuts. Like, if you see my egg-shaped head and you want to make it more like an egg, oh my God, just push it as much as you want, because I actually I love seeing those things. I love giving the people the tranquility to tell them, if I'm going to be your subject matter, hell yeah, you know, try anything you want, because I'm totally fine. I won't ever be offended. So I'm painting a fellow painter, Tom Croft. He has an incredibly expressive face, and I was like, okay, I'm going to push this. I totally know that Tom is going to be cool with this. So I'm going to give myself the chance to, you know, simplify some of these shapes, distort a bunch of them. And because I am distorting, it sort of becomes a bit of a puzzle. And in my brain, because it is a puzzle, because I can kind of dissect all these areas of form, all these planes into puzzle pieces, I can actually assign specific color mixes to those pieces. So it just gives me a ton of liberty to say, yeah, if I'm distorting, why not just break all these forms into shapes of color? And I thought the result was super cool, and I'm super happy with how the painting came out. So you're awesome, Tom. Thank you for letting me paint you. The painting feels the way I imagine it to be when I decided that I was going to use a very earthy palette, which is, again, not restricted. That's what we're aiming for, a painting that doesn't feel bound by the decisions that we put in the palette, but that we are aware, there's a deep awareness of the limitations of our palette, but we don't feel any bit of constraint while we're working. We feel, okay, these are our choices. Let's push, and try to see how much we can get out of them. That's what we're going to do the whole week. By the way, this painting was on Yupo, was on a synthetic sheet. So paint actually behaves a little bit differently. I'm going to try to use Yupo all throughout the week. We'll see if I have enough. I don't know. I'm going to try to keep also the dimension of the painting the same, just so that it feels like a series, like an exercise where I just want to ease myself back into oil paint. So I'm hoping that by you seeing the decisions that I make in the palette, it becomes a little bit more clear. But, and I've always said this, and this is why I don't really usually show my palette, I'm not a clean painter. I'm not. I don't know how academic my palette can be. I don't know how much knowledge you can extract from my dirty mixes. But I wasn't going to try to tidy up for you guys, because I'm going to show you the painter that I am and the way I paint. And that's about it. So you're not going to get like really nice strings of color. You're going to get like puddles of mud. That's my painting. Kind of nice shifting puddles of mud. And I hope that makes sense to at least one person out there that's watching the videos. I'll be fine if just one of you goes like, oh yeah, I can totally mix like that. That was it for today. Let's hope that tomorrow I can do another painting that shows you alternatives within the same palette. So thank you guys for hanging out. See you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye.